Well, good evening. Welcome to the midweek service here at Calvary Road Baptist Church. Let's stand together, and the song will be up on the wall. We're going to sing verses of Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus on the wall. Oh, soul, are you weary and troubled? No light in the darkness you see. There's light for a look at the Savior, and life more abundant and free. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Through death to life everlasting, he and we follow him there. For sin no more hath dominion, for more than conquerors we are. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Oh, last. His word shall not fail you, he promised. Believe and all will be well. Then go to a world that is dying, his perfect salvation to tell. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Amen. It is good seeing all of you here tonight. Brother Derek, would you open us up in prayer?
Heavenly Father, I thank you for the day, Lord. I thank you for another time we can come and worship you, Lord. I pray that in this time that we're in, Lord, I pray that we would turn our eyes upon you, Lord, and not worry about things going around, Lord, that distract us from you. God, I pray that we be in your word. God, give us the strength and the bold witness, Lord, to tell others about you. Lord, be your will. God, I just pray that you be with the service tonight, Lord. I pray that it touch our hearts. That's all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. You can be seated. And just a couple of real quick things tonight. We'll have our prayer request later on, and we do have a thread going on our church's Facebook page and our group. And so if you have a request and you're on that group page, you get that prayer request listed so that when we start our prayer time, we will share those with everybody. And it is a lot easier to hear, I'm saying them from up here with a microphone, than when we're kind of having those just kind of set around the room. And so if you'll put those on there, we'll read those out. Then a couple things as far as, I hate that all announcements are for the most part like cancellations, but just looking ahead, a few things on the calendar. Our Amazing Grace lunch coming, that would have been coming this next Monday. We will not be able to have that. And then also we did a camp out around Father's Day. We will not be having that either. Probably for the most part, most of our calendar stuff that you have for the year-end stuff is you're going to be fine as far as in July, starting from there on. We'll kind of bear with us on here through the month of June. I think there is a business meeting at the end of this month, which we will have, but then outside of that, everything in June. And try to set some things for sure on what we're doing with Sunday school and our schedule that we've talked about And so we'll try to get that to where this weekend, and then Sunday, hopefully be able to have an announcement for you as a church so that we can begin to plan. And I know that'll be helpful for churches that would like to plan some things for your class as we begin to resume some things back to normal set of times and being able to meet together, and looking forward to being able to do that. Also, for those sing the specials, we'll try to get back to a special schedule so that you don't have pat on you on the day of the service going, hey, can you sing today? Because I know that's not always able to be here those days, and everything's been kind of up in the air. So hopefully real soon here start to settle back down, and we've got people out of town. I think 6 of our teenagers are out at, well, 5 of them. One of them came in tonight. Glad Rachel was able to make it back, but the other 5 I think are all out there at the camp. They are doing a stop there. And we have 6 of our teenagers working at Indian Creek Baptist Camp this year, and glad that they're able to do that. We miss them not being able to be here with us, but I know we've got others that are out of town, and but it's all of you here tonight. We'll go ahead and have another song, and then we'll figure out the order of service after that.
Shadow of turning with the great song. Listen to the words as we sing, Great is Thy Faithfulness.
Seated, and I'm going to hopefully this cross on our live stream. We're having some problems on our live stream, and so we are going to reboot the computer back there. So if you're on live stream, just give us a couple minutes and let it reboot, and we'll restart the live streams. But it is not coming through very good right now, and so if they're still watching, because it's really annoying trying to watch it with it glitching as bad as it was, but just wanted to put that out there that if they're watching, we're going to start that. So if you want to go ahead and start that reboot, that'll be fine.
I trust him, how I proved him more and more. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust him more.
Jesus, draw me ever nearer as I labor through the storm. You have called me to this passage, and I'll follow though I'm worn. May this journey bring a blessing. May I rise on wings of faith, and at the end of my heart's testing, with your likeness let me wake. Jesus, guide me through the tempest. Keep my spirit stayed and sure. When the midnight meets the morning, let me love you even more. May this journey bring a blessing. May I rise on wings of faith, and at the end of my heart's testing, with your likeness let me wake. Let the treasures of the trial form within me as I go. At the end of this long passage, let me leave them at your throne. May this journey bring a blessing. May I rise on wings of faith, and at the end of my heart's testing, with your likeness let me wake. May this journey bring a blessing. May I rise on wings of faith, and at the end of my heart's testing, with your likeness let me wake.
Amen. Appreciate that song. And we want to go through, let me double check here, make sure we've got any, if I update, make sure if we've got any new comments come in under our prayer request thread.
Good morning, everyone. Please stand and turn in your hymn books to page number 241. We're going to sing that second again with the choir. Christ arose, verse number 2, page number 241. Vainly they watch his bed, Jesus my Savior. Vainly they seal the dead, Jesus my Lord. Up from the grave he arose, with a mighty triumph for his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with his saints to reign. He arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. On the last verse, death cannot keep his prey, Jesus my Savior. He tore the bars away, Jesus my Lord. Up from the grave he arose, with a mighty triumph for his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with his saints to reign. He arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. 67, we're going to sing all 4 verses of At Calvary, number 6, 7. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free, pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. By God's word at last my sin I learned. Then I trembled at the law I turned, till my guilty soul imploring turned to Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free, pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Now I give unto Jesus everything. Now I gladly own him as my king. Now my raptured soul can only sing of Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free, pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. On the last, oh, the love that true salvation's plan. Oh, the grace that brought it down to man. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free, pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary.
Once when the sun came down from heaven, angels were singing, shepherds came, hoping to see him, wise men traveling on the hay. Once when the sun came down from Calvary, dark filled the earth in the middle of the day. That's where he died on the cross he carried. His blood took the stain of sin away. Oh, the grace sent down upon us, holy God, on unholy ground. Nothing on earth can take him from us. Glory in the highest, the sun came down. Once when the sun came down the mountain from Joseph's tomb, alive once more, how his disciples must have shouted. Death could not hold him, Jesus our Lord. Oh, the grace sent down upon us, holy God, on unholy ground. Nothing on earth can take him from us. Glory in the highest, the sun came down. Nothing on earth can take him from us. Glory in the highest, the sun came down.
Good morning, everyone. Please stand and turn in your hymn books to page number 241. We're going to sing that second verse again with the choir. Christ arose, verse number 2, page number 241. Vainly they watch his bed, Jesus my Savior. Vainly they seal the dead, Jesus my Lord. Up from the grave he arose, with a mighty triumph for his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with his saints to reign. He arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. On the last verse, death cannot keep his prey, Jesus my Savior. He tore the bars away, Jesus my Lord. Up from the grave he arose, with a mighty triumph for his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with his saints to reign. He arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. 67, we're going to sing all 4 verses of At Calvary.
Book for a little while now, and we've been in chapter 6. We had talked about some of the limitations that we have, and so in chapter 7 and chapter 8, he'll be talking about how, once we understand the limitations that are inherent in every one of us, how can we live wisely in light of those things. And so in this chapter, he's talked about taking in this life and looking at the things that are actually better for us. And he talked about at the beginning that sorrow was better than laughter, and it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. And he was talking about the fact that these things help impact us and help us to recognize our own mortality and help us to recognize our own need. So we have to grasp for those things. Verse 9 tells us not to be, that we're, the anger, we can't be quickly angered. That's the behavior of fools. Verse number 10 telling us not to live in the good old days and to be longing for days gone by, but to live in today and face the concerns of today. Verse 11 through 14 talks about how wisdom is like an inheritance, that it's of great value, that it can be a huge help, or it can be squandered away. It also talked about in verse 15 through 18 about the truth, about the righteous and the wicked, and that sometimes it might seem like the righteous don't get the benefit here on earth of that long life and all those blessings. We realize that sometimes our perception is wrong, and we don't always look at the blessings they're actually receiving, or we might look at somebody else and think they've got it all just because they have material things, not realize the problems that they have as well. Last week we also talked about knowing that our wisdom that we can gain from the Lord makes us more powerful and more stronger than even those that talks about 10 leaders in the city. And so we come to the end of this chapter, and like I said, chapter 7 and chapter 8 are really kind of a continuation of this thought. So we might end up moving into chapter 8 tonight. I'm not sure, but we'll go ahead and start here, finish out this chapter, and then, like I said, it's kind of a seamless transition then into verse number 28. So look at verse number 26. The Bible says, I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, her hands as bands. Whoso pleaseth God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. Behold, this have I found, saith the preacher, counting one by one to find out the account, which set my soul seeketh, but I find not. I find not one man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those have I not found. Lo, this only have I found, that God hath made man upright, but they have sought out many inventions. And so as he gets to this end of this chapter, he's talking about the fact that we, if we're going to live wisely, recognizing our own limitations, that we have to guard against sinful men and immoral women. And of course, he is talking as a man himself and as a king and as one who is speaking from personal experience here. He realized that he lived in the midst of a fallen race, immoral and unrighteous people, which he was one of. And he began his next lesson with a specific example that I believe is also one that, as he's writing it, is also very personal to him. One that he understands all too well. One that it is painfully personal, and he concludes this chapter with a general truth. And he talks about, in verse 26, that the immoral woman is more bitter than death. And some people read this and they believe that verse number 26 is saying that the woman is kind of a representation of the pursuit of wisdom and understanding that Solomon had talked about previously, or maybe the wisdom of the world. But I believe Solomon's obsession and experience with women, remember he had 1,000 either wives or concubines in his life, I believe that shows us that his obsession with that probably lends us to believe that he is speaking literally here of the dangers of pursuing and falling for immoral women. He was describing, I believe, the dangers of sexual immorality. Men and women alike, today, we all live in a world that is obsessed with sensuality. You can't even, I'll be honest with you can't even go to a Christian bookstore today and buy a CD that the singer, if the singer's a woman, that they are not posed in sensual poses. I remember years ago, about the time I moved up there to Michigan, I remember there was a group that was real big in contemporary Christian music, and they weren't like way out there or nothing, but there was a group called Point of Grace. And all their CD albums, I remember seeing them, and they're all like pressed up against a brick wall for their photo album covers. And I'm like, what in the world is going on in our world? That this is what we are using to sell Christian music CDs. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when you turn on regular TV and you see commercials and you think, what in the world are they even selling? And then at the end, you find the product that they're selling. But we all know what they're really selling in these commercials. They're selling the young women that are in those commercials, and they're using that to draw the attention of the person who is sitting on their couch watching the TV. We live in a world where it's everywhere around us, and so if we are wise and we recognize our own weakness, and we're wise enough to recognize the world in which we live, to say these darts are coming from everywhere, we better learn how to guard ourselves, because that dart can be coming from anywhere at any moment. Over the years, I've dealt with especially a number of young people that have gotten into trouble online. And many times, I'll just tell you, when you really start to find out when did this start, when did this happen, it happened very innocently doing a homework situation or something, and a pop-up comes up. And they click on this, and the next pop-up is a little bit more risque, and the next one's just a little bit more, and the next one's just a little bit more. And once you've clicked on a few of those, guess what? All that spyware that's on your computer, they'll send you a ton of them. And you'll have ample opportunity to click on these things. And then suddenly, they're everywhere. And now, we used to live in a world where that kind of stuff, the access to that kind of stuff was much more difficult. But now, because of cell phones and iPads and tablets and laptops and all these things, they're available everywhere. And we have to be careful, because the people that program a lot of the apps and stuff they're not exactly looking out for our spiritual integrity. There's all kinds of stories out there about some of these apps that are being used in sex trafficking situations, where they're trying to use these things to recruit young people and it's just a horrible, wicked world that we live in. And we aren't immune to it. And so what we do is we have to say, I need to be simple concerning evil. I don't need to do a deep dive into learning what all these things are and find out all the evil that's out there so that I don't put myself right in front of all that temptation. but I also need to be wise enough to say, these are the things I need to avoid so that I don't end up doing those things. So it's important for us to be wise in this age. And it's important for us also, as we're reading this passage, to be familiar with the facts that so that we can understand Solomon's perspective. Scripture tells us that he had and I guess the easiest way to say this would be a fondness of women. That was definitely a weakness that Solomon had, especially foreign women who were not Israelites and did not serve the God of the Israelites. 1 Kings chapter 11 tells us that he married many women that followed pagan gods, and they turned his heart away from the Lord to their heathen idols. So the consequences of his fleshly surrender to these women ends up being, it looks like here in chapter 7, a little bit of bitterness towards them, as if it's all their fault. As if, let's be really honest about this, as if most of those women that he was married to really had any choice in the matter to begin with. He chose them, he married them, and then he follows after their heathen gods, and then he gets bitter at them. Consequences are like I said, the bitterness is being exposed in these verses here. A statement that a seductive woman is more bitter than death is pretty striking when you read all through Ecclesiastes, and he's revealing already his feelings about death. Death was his feared and hated enemy. It was going to bring an end to all of his accomplishments. All these things, early on he said, you do all these things and nothing changes. You end up leaving this for people who are going to waste it and squander it. And what you've done, other people are going to come behind you and undo. And so he seems like he is hating the idea of death. But then he says, these women I hate even more than death. They're worse than death. He felt that it was unfair that he, the wisest and wealthiest king in the world, was doomed to die just like everybody else. Just didn't seem fair. He hated death, yet he felt a stronger disdain for these immoral women. They felt like their seduction was more bitter than death itself. And it's important to note that he was not stating his bitterness towards women in general. Rather than this, he's talking about the one who is whose hearts are as snares and nets as her hand and her hands as bands. He says, he talks about this sinful woman here, this one who is using their passion like a snare. Think about the description he's given. He's talking about the trap that they will set for you, the chains there. Her motive is to bring them into bondage or to toy with someone until they're no further use to them, and then destroying them. This is a statement about their heart at first, or their motives and intentions, that maybe they're professing love and desire and attraction, but it's just all there as a trap. They can't be believed or trusted. The picture is that of a trapped animal that can't get escape, that there's no way out. Then it talks about her hands as well, her deceit or misuse of those hands, that they will bind you and make you captive to them. Instead of they use the soft hands to pull you in, and then the claws that sink in after they have found their prey. There's no fleeing their clutches. The immoral woman, though, he says, can be escaped when we please God and obey Him. It's not like we're helpless. Men, let's be honest, the fact that we have a inward weakness doesn't make us helpless. The fact that we might be drawn to certain things doesn't mean it's an excuse to indulge in those things. There's those out there that will say, well, my sin is okay because according to them, I was born this way. Whereas nobody gets to go up and punch somebody in the face and go, sorry, I was just born with an angry disposition, so I'm just going to indulge in my sin. Nobody can say, well, you know what, I was just born to like women, so I guess I'll just have 100 or 1,000 concubines and wives, and that's okay because, hey, I was born this way. No, God has designed ways that we are to conform to Him, not to whatever desire we have in the moment. So no matter what desire we have, we are not helpless to have victory over those as long as God is still on His throne. As long as He's on His throne, we can have victory. And since He's always going to be in His throne, we can always find victory in this life. It can be this temptation can be escaped by those who please God and obey Him. And the one way to avoid the trap and bondage is to establish pleasing God as the most important thing in our life. What's the most important thing in our life? Whenever it's not pleasing God, we're headed for trouble. And can I be honest with you? It can be pleasing God for a long time. And then 1 or 2 days of it not being your main goal, you find the traps are right there. It's not like many days of victory doesn't make the trap suddenly go away. In fact, it just gives them more time to lay more traps. The man who is prone to these problems, and it really can be, and he's using the example here of a woman, but it can be any sin that we think of. When we are prone to temptation, we get bound, or we get caught in those things. We're bound by chains. And any kind of temptation that we suffer with, only a greater love for the Lord than our love for the flesh is going to protect us from that. Because we all have, and it may not be this temptation there for some men. There are all kinds of temptations that are out there for us. And can I just say, the devil knows which temptation is going to work on you a lot better than you probably know. And so maybe that temptation of money, or maybe that temptation of control and power, who knows what it might be. But if we don't love God more than we love whatever that temptation is, we'll choose that temptation. And we'll be bound up by that. The desire to please and obey God above pleasing self is the only insurance against falling into this trap. When he talks about this sinful man, he's representing the entire human race. He says he only found one man in 1,000 to be wise and upright. He goes on to kind of give a backhanded comment next. I found one man among 1,000 to be wise. I couldn't find one woman, is what he said. Again, you see a little bit of his bitterness coming out here. He found that God created people to be upright, but that people searched out their own inventions, he says, their own schemes. His thorough research and observation of life revealed some disturbing truths here when he says he searched to understand both wisdom and wickedness in verse 25, and he genuinely wanted to understand what makes a person perform sinful deeds. So he studies human behavior, and he explores the depth of human wickedness, and maybe with the hope of finding some redeeming quality in man, because he's looking around under the sun and he's not finding much good to look at. And he's thinking, man, I've got to find something, and he discovers a tragic fact. There's not a lot good there to find. That all of us are sinful. That people are wicked. They're beyond understanding in our own selves. And even more tragic is there's really no explanation for this despicable, ungodly conduct that all of us can be guilty of. He says he found a man in 1,000 to be wise and upright, and he found no wise woman. And according to his observations and lifetime experience, wisdom in a man was rare. And like I said, according to him, it was even more rare to find it in a woman. Now, I don't believe this is necessarily meant to be an absolute statement regarding all women. It's his experience in life, and I don't think it's any coincidence that he picked the number 1,000. He said, I find 1,000 men, I might find one. He looks at his 1,000 women. He said, I can't find any. I'd been having a bad day. Bad day with the wives and concubines here. Out of his 1,000 women, couldn't find one trustworthy one. Notice his point. He wasn't saying that his emphasis here isn't, well, there's more men than women that I can find that are good. That wasn't what his emphasis was. But that what he's trying to say is, I'm looking everywhere, and I can't hardly find anybody that seems to be doing right. He found that God created people to be upright, but that people didn't follow him, they followed their own schemes. They sought out many inventions. God was not to blame for humanity's wicked condition. He didn't create people to be selfish, immoral, and lawless and violent. He created us to be righteous, to be moral, to be honorable, faithful, obedient to him. But we got our own ideas. They didn't follow God, but they defiantly pursued their own desires. So instead of following his path, they live as they wish, they go their own direction, they follow their own path, and it even seems that they dream up new ways to sin. It's like they're just trying to find a new way to go opposite of what he wants. You know what I have found in my own life, and maybe you found this in your life, or maybe you've noticed this in others. A lot of my prayer requests today would have not been a prayer request had I prayed more about my decisions I was making yesterday. Or my prayer request today wouldn't be there if I had listened to the advice of somebody else yesterday. You'll see people all the time that have prayer requests about situations, and you say, why did you put yourself in this situation that now you've got to pray for this mess that you have found yourself in? Because we naturally, in our flesh, want to resist the right and go towards the things that satisfy in the moment. I believe Solomon's pretty accurate in his analysis of the human race. We're all sinners in need of a Savior. But here's the good news. We have a Savior. So it's not the end of the story that we're wicked. The end of the story is we have a Redeemer who forgives us of those sins. We are spiritually dead before salvation. We are depraved. We are unable to obey God in our fallen nature. And in spite of all that, while we're yet sinners, Christ died for us. And once we're saved, we can cling to that promise. Our only hope is not to turn over a new leaf and reform our old sinful nature. It is to get a new nature. It is to get a new nature, the nature of God that is passed on to us when we receive Christ as our Savior. And see, true wisdom is turning to Christ. Only He is powerful enough to break the chains of sin and set us free. Wisdom is walking in the Spirit, and only through the presence and the power of the Spirit can we overcome sin in our life. Wisdom, then, is guarding ourselves from those temptations. It's not about strength to fight temptation. It's about the wisdom to avoid the temptation. I remember when I was younger, you know when you're younger and you think that like you're never going to get old and you're never going to get sore. And, you know, we'd be doing something and I'd be out there picking something up and you're picking it up all wrong. And Willie would say something to me like, you know, you're supposed to bend your knees. And I'm like, well, maybe if you're old, you know. I'm young. I can do this. I can pick this up. And an expression that I've heard many times in my life, and now that my kids would see me as old, I use this expression as well. Work smarter, not harder. Well, you know, it's the same thing in fighting temptation. Work smarter, not harder. Be smart enough to avoid the fight because you're not near as strong as you think you are. You're not near as strong as you think you are. And here's what I have found. I have pains today that I think are completely because of the way I picked stuff up when I was 15. 41 years old, I still deal with other problems because of things I did when I was 15 as well. I still deal with sins and deal with the consequences of the sins that I did many years ago because I thought I was strong enough to do it. And I thought it wouldn't bother me. I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought it was no big deal. And now I'm finding the aches and pains are very real. We'd be wise to use those things in our life to say, I need to avoid these things. When I was 16 years old, I was living with my dad, and everybody in my school was like, you know, we got this girl that you need to date. You know, I was living down there in Alabama, and they're like, we got this girl you need to date. And I remember my first question was, I said, well, is she a Christian? Oh, yeah, she goes to church. That's like, you know, their answer. Yeah, she goes to church. I'm like, that could be anything. They could be like, we handle snakes. You know, I don't know what all that might mean to some people. And I said, well, where does she go to church? And they said, I don't know. She goes to like this Methodist church. And I'm like, well, I can't date her then. She's not Baptist. And my friends were like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Who cares that she's not Baptist? And I was like, well, they believe all kinds of craziness. They believe you can lose your salvation. They believe that you're saved because of your baptism. They believe all these different things. And my dad just thought that was crazy that I would worry about those things. I was like, Dad, I'm going to be a Baptist preacher. It's probably a good idea that I marry somebody that knows a little bit of doctrine and understands, you know, that we don't lose our salvation and that we aren't saved by baptism and all these things. And you know, I just couldn't understand. And then, man, people in school said, man, you're so judgmental. I can't believe you would do that. She's a nice girl. Man, I'm so glad that I didn't make the mistake of saying, it's no big deal. Because I know some other people that's kind of the approach they took. And now, they're fighting some custody battles. They're trying to divide up estates because they didn't listen to any kind of wisdom. And it wasn't that I was strong enough to fight that temptation. I said, I don't even want to meet her. I don't, because you know what? If I'd have met her, I'd have said, she might be a good Baptist one day. Randy, I hope Randy won't mind me telling the story, but I'm going to tell it anyway, so I guess I'll find out afterwards if Randy minds me telling the story. When Randy was single, Randy, much like tonight, no, I was kidding. Somebody asked if he was in trouble sitting up here by himself. But before Randy was married, and he was saying this jokingly, so don't think Randy was saying this here, which I know you know Randy says a lot of things jokingly. But every time we'd be watching TV, if a very pretty woman would come on screen, especially like, Fox News, they only like to hire people that are very pretty. They like to make sure they don't always dress real well and stuff on TV. And so they would come on there and Randy goes, she might be an independent Baptist, don't you think? Like, yeah, I don't think so, Randy. I don't think so. It's amazing that your eyes could maybe convince you, maybe there's a chance. And so I said, man, I don't even want to meet her. I don't even want to go down that road and tell myself, maybe it's not that big a deal. It was a lot easier to say, no, I'm not interested, when I didn't put myself next to that person to see if I had more interest than I thought I would. And so we have to understand that we need to be wise concerning the ways of the devil. The way to handle these things in our life is important. If you ask a group of people to define wisdom, their response is probably going to be about as varied as however many individuals you ask. It would probably have some measure of truth. I like this in the Life Application Study Bible. It gives a sensible definition right here in the book of Ecclesiastes about wisdom. It says, wisdom is the ability to see life from God's perspective and then know the best course of action to take. So it's not just about knowledge. It's about knowing the best course of action from God's perspective. So if you break that down, a wise person has the ability to see life from God's perspective. Living wisely is the result then of fearing God. Solomon extols the virtue of fearing God to fearing the Lord close to 20 times between Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. He specifically states that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. In other words, the first step toward becoming wise is acknowledging and fearing God, recognizing that He's always right and He has the answers. So living wisely is the result of knowing God. We can only know Him or know His perspective when we know Him. And so we have to get in His Word. Living wisely is the result of knowing and understanding His Word. Because God has revealed His ways in a book for us that we don't get by osmosis. We've got to actually open it up and read it and study it. And ask God to then illuminate those things in our life. Secondly, then a wise person knows the best course of action to take. It's about perception. God has given us a very specific set of principles in His Word to tell us how to walk day by day. And as we read it, we can sense the Holy Spirit's revealing of wisdom to us. And it's practical, but it's not necessarily always practical from our perspective because we don't always see the whole picture. And so sometimes we might think things are pragmatic, and we might say, this makes financial sense, so it must be God's will. God's will isn't always going to make complete sense, but it's not necessarily going to be crazy either. God's not going to say, hey, you know what, we're taking faith promise commitments. You make $40,000 this year, I think you should commit $60,000 to faith promise mission. It's practical in the sense that we can see what God is doing. God is leading us. God's not leading us to take huge, giant leaps. He says He guides our steps. He guides our steps. He will lead you to that next step. And He's very near at all times. He knows us. He has a plan for us individually. And every situation that we face and every decision we make, God has a course of action for us. So our prayer should always be, Lord, what's the next right step for me? Not necessarily the step everybody else should take. Lord, what's my next right step? That's the decision we need to worry about. Not, Lord, where will you have me in 5 years? I hate those questions when you're in school and they go, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Well, I guarantee you in 2010, nobody saw this stuff coming 10 years down the road. If you'd have told me last year, if you'd have told me last summer, we'd be having drive-in services in our church. I said, you're crazy. There's no way we're doing that. I don't even know how to do a drive-in service. I don't even know what an FM transmitter is. I didn't know what that was last year at this time. I wouldn't have known how to do any of these things that we've done. I still don't know if I know how to do any of the things we've done. Fortunately, Brian's here. He's figured out a lot of it for us. But don't ask God constantly, God, where's this headed? It's, God, what do I do next? What do I do next? And then leave the results to Him. If we need wisdom to determine the right course of action, it's available to us. He says, if any of us lack wisdom, let him ask of God that give it to all men liberally, and that breaketh not, and it shall be given him. And so as we get to chapter 8, we're going to continue looking at how we can live wisely. And in this chapter, he talks about seeking to be wise, obeying authority, keeping in mind the limitations that we have, and observing the things that go on in the world, and thinking deeply about those things. And then lastly, he closes out chapter 8 by just telling us that we need to just enjoy life. Enjoy life. And I know that sounds like you walked into a Joel Osteen message. But God says enjoy life. He's told us He's come that we might have life and that we can have it more abundantly. And man, I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't know if I live life abundantly or just redundantly. And we just go through the same things over and over and over again. I've been thankful for this interruption over the last few months. It got me out of the rut, I can tell you that. It got me out of redundancy. I don't like the way it happened. I don't necessarily think all of it was necessary, but I ain't complaining about it that much because it has helped me in numerous ways. And I hope that it's helping you as well when you realize that we can't change those things, but we can say, God, let it change me. God, let the circumstances of this world change me to make me more like you. All right, let's go ahead and stand tonight. We're going to be dismissed in a word of prayer. And as we go out tonight, again, just continue praying for one another. I want to again mention, just because of the fact that a lot of decisions will be made before we get back together next Sunday for Teresa and her family. Be praying for that situation, for them, with her brother passing away, with the funeral. Hopefully, if they are able to do one, that she will be able to get up there for that. I know it's obviously difficult enough to lose a family member, but then to not be able to be with your family during these times, and to even be able to have that moment of that funeral, to be able to have that sense of closure there, how difficult that is. So be praying for her and for her family. Brother Randy, would you dismiss us tonight in prayer?